Welcome to the Trailblazers. I'm your host, Perry Rarick. The purpose of the Trailblazers is to share with you interesting discussions I have with trailblazing business leaders. My guests are innovative, they're experts at what they do. They offer unique solutions to some of the most vexing problems that businesses face, and they're not afraid to challenge the status quo. My Trailblazer guest today is Claire Martell. She is co-founder, CEO, and president of Murdock-Martell, a finance, accounting, and human resources firm that works with some of the most innovative life sciences and technology startups. Claire has lived a career chock full of accomplishments encompassing corporate management, finance, accounting, HR, and audit. She now leads the firm Murdock-Martell and is responsible for the firm's strategic initiatives to serve and support technology and life sciences startups, emerging businesses, and large enterprises, from budding startups that are still at the good idea stage all the way up to companies like Google. Prior to co-founding Murdock-Martell, Claire was executive vice president at Horn Murdock Cole, now part of RGP Global Consulting. And as a former co-owner at Horn Murdock Cole, she was a major driver in the firm's growth from a dozen professionals to over 150 staff. She has worked with companies, such a good list. Listen carefully. She has worked with companies who form a who's list for success. Companies that often serve as case studies in those books we love to read on successful business stories. They include Hewlett-Packard, Agilent, Exodus, and Savis, that became part of Lumen Technologies, Cadence, and Target Therapeutics, which became part of Boston Scientific, still is. And Claire, I'm grabbing a quote from your LinkedIn profile. This really caught my attention, and I love this. Numbers don't just tell a story, they build the roadmap for a company's future. Claire Martell, welcome to the Trailblazers.
Thank you for having me, Perry. Happy to be here.
Well, this is going to be an awesome discussion, something I've never delved in. I know nothing about this. So thankfully, all I have to do is ask questions, and you're going to tell us all about this space. But in preparing for our discussion, I just gathered up some numbers which were startling to me, and some of the context in which we're going to be talking about. I learned that 30 to 45% of startups don't succeed because, not that they don't have a good idea or a good product or good technology, but because they lack financial modeling, and there's some failure related to that. 60% fail, and I'm going to give everybody a little hint why you're both an accounting and finance and human resources firm. 60% of startups fail because key members leave the organization before they get any much traction. That's according to worldmetrics.org. And there are about 800 to 1,000 biotech startups globally. That's a lot of startups. They're considered organizations that would be in the drug discovery stage, very early stages of a drug therapy. And it doesn't include the contract development and manufacturing organizations, the contract and clinical research organizations, and all of those who provide equipment and instrumentation. So we're going to get into that with that as a backdrop. So you established a business to help startups overcome some of the biggest issues they face related to finance and human resources, which I found to be a fascinating combination. We're going to get into each of those, but I'd like you to start by just telling us about Murdock-Martell. What do you do? How did you come up with this unique combination of service and support categories?
Sure. Well, I give a lot of credit to my former co-founder, Leslie Murdock. He left Ernst & Young. I joined him a few years later from PwC, and we worked together and built a practice where we were in an environment that was really needing resources in accounting and finance. That was originally the starting point. And these companies oftentimes needed project assistance, and those are some of the more enterprise level companies you were mentioning, working on the carve out of Agilent from Hewlett Packard, for example. Those types of projects were more enterprise level, and that's where I started. A lot of the work through the 90s was IPO readiness. There were a lot of IPOs going on at the time, both in medical device, life sciences, and technology, various verticals. So we worked with these companies to help them get ready for IPO and their secondary offerings, of course, assisted through some of those bond offerings and the like. So the that readiness for an IPO work led us into working with more and more early stage companies. And those companies were really a lot of fun to work with. So we had the ability to um, essentially uh, guide these companies in building teams and putting in place the infrastructure that was needed for a good foundation for becoming public at some later point in time. So that's really the starting point. We later, after building that firm, did end up selling it. We moved on, did other things for a while. We came back together and decided we really like working with early stage companies. And we created this firm, Murdock-Martell. This firm is a boutique practice. He retired from here several years ago now, and we have a boutique team around 45 people currently, where we are servicing primarily startups in life sciences, med tech, and technology, various verticals.
What a experience and history. I mean, it really is a who's who. As as I name these companies you worked with, and the stories you must have sitting in those rooms where all the big ideas were coming from. That really a great story, and it's inspiring at the same time. I want to. So, how did the idea for accounting, finance, and where did human resources come in? How did that happen?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I suppose, my background, I'm a CPA. A number of our team members are CPAs. We are primarily accounting and finance minded. However, in working with a lot of these early stage companies, a lot of HR problems were surfacing because they're working to employ people. That leads to terminations at times. There are employee relations issues and all kinds of ongoing HR compliance matters that, even at the smallest size, they're responsible for attending to. And we were getting all these questions, realized this isn't something that, our team members are feeling comfortable addressing. So, to help support them, we started hiring HR team members. And those services, while not the significant portion of our practice by any means, it is an important part to empower our existing finance and accounting team members to leverage their knowledge and making sure that we're giving the best service possible to our clients.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, you're just running into problems and just helping clients solve them. It's really interesting. All
Somewhat
right, let's.
opportunistic, yes.
All right, so we'll transition into. I want you to talk about some of the biggest financial issues that startups encounter, and how the ones that lead to failure. Some of those more significant ones. And you talked previously. We talked. Sometimes they happen, and that's not how they're identified when you first run into some of these symptoms. So, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I think I categorize maybe this question into two areas where some things are within the company's control and some things are not. And the things that are not within a company's control, like a market shift, and we're seeing this right now with technology. For example, SaaS companies are being challenged by AI, and former SaaS models models, business models, how they're operating, what they're developing, all of the level of their operations is really quite challenged by AI right now. And so the market is shifting. They need to adapt. We see this across the board with other verticals as well. And so those things are not necessarily within a given team's ability to control in any way, but they do need to take responsibility for adapting to them. So I think that's one area where we see sometimes companies fail is in the lack of ability to adapt to those market shifts. Another area I think in general, of course, is leadership. What is the company's leadership, whether it's their culture, the skill set, any number of different things that could exist there with the leadership team. Um, we find, of course, from the financial angle, that financial rigor and seriousness around a leader's fiduciary responsibility with investor money is an enormous contributor to success and failure oftentimes. So if a leader understands their obligation is not to, say, well, now I have a open wallet and I'm going to go spend it wildly, then they're obviously going to be more successful. I think the the profile of many entrepreneurs is that they're risk takers. Of course, that's what makes them willing and able to jump in and take this risk. At the same time, there needs to be a conservative mindset around the use of the funds, and sometimes that just doesn't happen. Sometimes there's a different view, and we see, kind of spending getting a little out of hand. So that is a place where we've seen companies fail. So I think having the ability to make sure that there's fiduciary responsibility around that money is important. I think another thing with the leadership is kind of the trade-off between the focus of their energy, their time management. A lot of founders are, they're brilliant scientists, amazing uh, entrepreneurs. They're oftentimes highly degreed individuals, extremely intelligent. And at the same time, if they're prone to being too hands on, they suffer from a lack of ability to delegate. That can really trap their time into things that aren't most beneficial for the company and and building their team and their product. So that is an area I would say is kind of that time focus trade off issue is an area where I also see failure from time to time. Um, yeah, and I think the other factor is probably the team, building the team to your weakness is part of good leadership. Where do we need to shore up and add the skills, either skills that the founding team doesn't have themselves, or as the company grows within individual departments. So the um, the ability to build a team, I think, is extremely important to do it well within those first however many hires. I usually say the first 20 hires are extremely important. Each person becomes a force multiplier to the contributions of what that organization is going to be able to accomplish. Everyone is carrying oftentimes a heavy load beyond a single role, and those players have to be nimble, individually strong, flexible to rapid change. It's just that's part of the nature of working in startups. And so having the right team of people who can do that is probably another area where sometimes I see companies just not make it because they didn't have all those great team members.
Yeah, so you encapsulate that so well. You've been at the front lines of that and all really critical issues that you raise. You spoke to me previously about forecasting and the importance of that and modeling it in a way. Now, when it fails, it looks like, oh, we ran out of money, but that was a problem that started long before you ran out of money. And so, can you talk a little bit about that and some of the contingencies and how you do financial modeling?
Sure. Yeah. The modeling is not just a single model. Oftentimes it makes sense to have a most likely model, but also develop alternative models where you have a best case situation and a worst case situation, or three possible outcomes where you revise those as circumstances change. And I think that's a really important part of getting it right, is adjusting that forecast as the market changes, as the team changes, as different dynamics are putting pressure on the business, maybe customer changes and what they're looking for and so forth. So I think having that model be nimble and having multiple versions of the model that may be relevant to the company's potential outcomes and scenarios is also important. And then adjusting them periodically.
When you use the term modeling, I think rigid, but that's not what you're describing. You're describing something that's very dynamic and flexible.
It does need to be flexible. I think being able to be a critic as part of developing the model, of a critic of your own information and of your own assumptions and your own um, information, gathering more information over time, being willing to be challenged with the information that you think you know. All of those variables can affect a model. And I do think that there's a need to revise that that set of assumptions pretty regularly, because market dynamics will change, your base of employees changes, you might lose a critical employee, you might have a gap in time until you can replace that individual. All of those things could impact product roadmap, or development cycles, or other kinds of um, elements that need to be baked into forecasts.
Yeah. You described earlier that the human resources component of your firm may be a little smaller. It's more enables the finance part, but it can cause a big problem. So if you have like a senior scientist who's really doing all the critical development of your therapy, and they leave, you mentioned they could be gone for a while. That can be a huge crisis. How do you approach that with the startups to try to help them understand how to go about that? How do you select these people? I mean, it's got to be art as much as science. But what kind of advice do you give them in that realm?
Well, I think losing a key team member can actually be very crippling to an organization, particularly when they're small and heavily reliant on that individual for the development of the product, and that alone can put a company under even. But I think when it comes to a more established organization where they may lose someone that is important, um, that old adage of "we're all replaceable" maybe applies, and there is likely someone else out there. It is a matter of time. They are much more, the scientists and the founders are much more familiar with who else in their field would be experts to hire than we are. Where we come into the advisory side is, how do we attract that individual? Do we have a good benefits package that would attract that individual? What else can we do to lure in good talent across the board? Not just with this individual. And are there things that we can do as an organization to help enable that person to perhaps make the decision to come over, be happy, and stay? All of those are, important HR factors that
Mhm.
oftentimes might be in the conversation.
Beyond the capabilities piece of that, like here's somebody who knows how to do what I need, there's got to be a certain mindset that somebody has to be part of a startup.
Absolutely. I think startups are not for everyone. That's for sure. I think if there's a desire to have a lot of predictability, to have a lot of structure, those kinds of personalities, they're oftentimes great in larger organizations. That's where those individuals can thrive. Startups might not be the right place for those people because there isn't a lot of structure. It takes a long time to get to the point where there is, a standard policies and procedures and, kind of things that you might take for granted in larger, more established organizations. I think the other thing is that there's a shift oftentimes in the roadmap of what a company might look like. If there's an assumption about the a product that's being developed that there's a market for, maybe the market changes and the product then needs to change. So um, that is the case oftentimes with technology. Technology moves quickly, um, and I think on the life sciences side, I would say it can be devastating to an organization to have uh, a product not pass FDA, for example, and that is that's actually a big issue for some of our clients in working through their early stages of clinical trial outcomes maybe not being ideal, um, and FDA approvals and not coming through. Those are maybe not bankrupting events, but they could be major setbacks, and that oftentimes can also result in changes to the team. You know, People may leave because of that. The company may need to have a downsizing because of that, and so we are oftentimes in that situation of needing to be the party where we have the responsibility for a RIF, for example, and that is never a comfortable situation for anyone. So these HR matters are follow the operational cycle of what's happening with the organization, and sometimes it's for the good, and sometimes it's a very difficult situation for the company.
Yeah, the FDA, that timeline, that's, there's a burn rate, that, speed to market, and you don't need setbacks like that because you're still spending money to overcome those. Yeah, great point. You mentioned some of the market challenges that SaaS companies are facing now. Is there anything that the life sciences space, besides the challenge of just bringing a drug to market and all of those hurdles and regulatory approvals, is there anything else that you notice that's going on in life sciences to keep that startups should keep an eye on?
There's the geopolitical situation is something that does impact life sciences. So disruption globally and supply chain concerns, tariff concerns, some of those things can be disruptive. I am seeing that with some of our life sciences companies, and that it's yet again not within their control. These are market shifts, and that's a classic example, actually, Perry, that you're pointing to right now. Life sciences is being impacted by things like that are out of their control, really.
Yeah. Yeah, that comes up in every conversation I have now. Yeah, it, and typically you don't, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm guessing you don't have a supply chain expert in most startups.
That's true. That's true.
Okay. Or a trade specialist, or yeah. Yeah, very yeah, it is causing a lot of disruption. Yeah. Um, okay, so you're sitting, I don't want to say one size, this isn't a one size fits all, but What is some of the top high level advice? And you would just, yeah, I mean, that's what you've been rolling out through our conversation here. But, you're talking to a CEO and you want to have like parting words of wisdom. This is somebody who's trying to, drive something innovative, to commercialize it. And, boy, make sure you look out for this. What are those things? If you could offer, just share a few gems with us.
I think there are a few things that come to mind. Perhaps I think reiterating on being wise with the money is important. It runs out faster than most founders realize it will, and I think that so kind of being judicious with the spending is important. Um, I think another thing that maybe is worth saying is that the back office is not glamorous or exciting in any way. Um, it is a place, however, that can cause major problems for the company if it does go unattended. And I think that is something that is that sometimes goes unrecognized. So it's just worth saying, that part. I think that there is a need to make sure that you're remaining compliant, and not ignoring the compliance aspects, even though they may be small initially, they grow rapidly into problems, and so that is kind of another area. And, I think when it comes to challenging your thinking, I think that's a good thing. Making sure that there are multiple scenarios to a model, that you are gaining lots of input into assumptions um, from people across the board who may have knowledge that could impact those assumptions. Um, and I think in general, building a good team of people you want to work with, because there's skill sets, and then there's good teams, and you need to build a good team. You need more than just basic skills. It's you know good people as well.
Yeah. You had also mentioned to me earlier about the importance that investors pay attention to the people, the innovators,
Mm,
uh, not necessarily the product.
yeah.
Can you offer some insights on that and some examples? Yeah.
Well, I think this is across the board. I've seen this pattern over the years that the investors want to invest in the people and their ideas. They obviously it's a table stakes to be brilliant and to have great ideas and to define a market and to say I have my you know this piece of the market identified for this great product. But eventually, these investors are going to need to be having hard discussions around what's happening with the company and the challenges that they're facing, and they want to invest in the people. And that's why early on the CFO isn't even usually part of the discussion with the initial investors. It's the founders. Those founders need to be believable, authentic, intelligent, good people to work with for the investors to want to put their money into the company. And so I think that is a common pattern I've just seen play out in the vast majority of cases where successful founders are able to attract more money because they've proven that they are that person in the past. And for early founders, maybe first time founders, they have to exhibit those things usually to be able to attract the money.
Hmm. What else have we? What else would you like to say? Is there anything I haven't asked you about that I should have?
Well, I think I've touched on most everything here, Perry. Thank you for these questions. I'll just start with saying, if there are questions that come up from your audience, I'm happy to be a thought partner with them through, some challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, well, thank you, Claire. Really clear. You're very user friendly. I with I don't want to slight all those CFOs out there, but sometimes they're hard to talk to. And, and you're very human and you make things understandable, and that's probably why your business is successful, but the kind of business you have. So thank you very much for that. How can our listeners get a hold of you?
Well, I'm out there on LinkedIn, Claire Martell, and Murdock-Martell is out there as well. And so we can be reached probably most easily that way. We also have a way to reach us through our website, murdockmartell.com. And so those are probably the best ways to start.
Awesome. Well, Claire, thank you very much for being with me today and sharing all those insights. What a gold mine you've shared with us. Claire Martell, she is the co-founder, CEO, and president of Murdock-Martell. Reach out to them. Just a great organization. And Claire, thank you for being a trailblazer.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Perry. Thank you so much for the interview.